Imagine the global economy is just this massive, incredibly complex engine. I mean, it literally powers everything, right? Your daily purchases, businesses, jobs, international trade, the whole shebang. But here's the catch. An engine that runs too hot is going to overheat into inflation, and one that runs too cold, well, that stalls into a recession. So who's the master mechanic keeping this giant machine purring? That would be the central bank. Welcome to today's Masterclass Explainer. We're going to completely open up the central bank's toolkit to see exactly how they fine-tune the economy using some seriously powerful quantitative and qualitative tools. Let's get into it.
Here's a quick look at our syllabus for today. We'll start with a rundown of the central bank's overall toolkit. Then we'll look at volume control using quantitative tools, followed by directional control using qualitative tools, and finally we'll wrap up with balancing the economic engine.
All right, part 1, the central bank's toolkit.
To really understand how our master mechanic operates, we first have to grasp the absolute biggest lever they possess. And no, it's actually not just printing money. It's something way more systemic: credit control. A central bank's most critical function is controlling credit, meaning they influence and manage the total supply of money and credit floating around in the economy. You have to remember, commercial banks are basically creating credit every single time they issue a loan. So by regulating how much credit those banks can create, the central bank is essentially controlling the lifeblood of the entire economic system. That is exactly how they keep inflation and deflation safely in check.
Now, the central bank basically takes two distinct approaches to pull this off. First, you've got quantitative methods. These control the overall cost and availability, literally the sheer volume, of credit in the economy. On the flip side, you have qualitative methods, which influence the specific use and direction of credit toward targeted sectors. Think of it like this. Quantitative tools are these heavy-duty dials that adjust the total volume of water flowing through a massive dam. While qualitative tools, those are like precision sprinklers, directing that water toward very specific crops.
Let's crack open that first drawer. Section 2, quantitative tools, or volume control.
The central bank relies heavily on three primary volume control instruments: the repo rate, open market operations, and reserve ratios. Each one of these is specifically designed to either flood the economy with liquidity or drain it right out. Let's break down exactly how these actually work in practice.
First up is the repo rate. Simply put, this is the interest rate the central bank charges your everyday commercial banks for short-term loans against government bonds. So, say the central bank wants to slow things down. Maybe inflation is running a bit hot and grocery prices are spiking. Step 1, they hike up the repo rate. Step 2, borrowing instantly becomes way more expensive for your local bank. And Step 3, because it costs the bank more to borrow, they're obviously going to pass that cost right on to you. Suddenly, mortgages and business loans get pricier, people borrow less, and the overall money supply shrinks. Boom, volume turned down.
The second quantitative tool is open market operations, or OMOs. This is when the central bank gets out there and buys or sells government bonds in the open market. When they want to tighten up the money supply, the process looks like this. Step 1. The central bank sells government securities to commercial banks. Step 2. The banks buy those bonds, which instantly absorbs their excess cash. Step 3. Because those banks now have vaults full of government bonds instead of actual cash, their capacity to lend money out to the public is severely reduced. They've effectively mopped up the excess liquidity, meaning there's just less cash out there for everyday loans.
And rounding out our volume controls, we have reserve ratios. Think of this as the central bank just flat out telling commercial banks exactly how much of their money has to stay locked up. There are two main flavors here. The cash reserve ratio, or CRR, is legally required percentage of total deposits that banks have to keep as cash directly with the central bank. Then you've got the statutory liquidity ratio, the SLR. That's a percentage they have to keep with themselves in highly liquid assets, think cash, gold, or government securities. By simply hiking up the CRR or the SLR, the central bank legally forces these banks to lock away a bigger chunk of their deposits. And just like that, their lending capacity shrinks.
Moving right along to Section 3, qualitative tools, which is all about directional control.
Okay, so those quantitative options we just talked about, those are the blunt instruments. But what if the economy doesn't actually need a massive system shock? What if we just need a minor correction in one specific area? That's when the central bank reaches for its directional tools: margin requirements, consumer credit regulation, and moral suasion. Instead of choking off all credit everywhere, these precision lasers direct cash toward productive stuff and steer it away from volatile or speculative stuff. Let's take a closer look.
Let's make this super concrete with margin requirements. The margin is just the required gap between a security's market value and the absolute maximum loan amount a bank can give you against it. So imagine you've got a security worth 1 lakh rupees. If the central bank decides to raise the margin requirement from 25% up to 30%, the maximum loan you can get instantly drops down to 70,000 rupees. Why would they do this? Well, by raising that margin, they can specifically target and curb risky, speculative borrowing in the stock market, all without making it any harder for a regular, everyday business to get a standard loan. Pretty clever, right?
Have you ever wondered why you absolutely have to put a specific minimum down payment when you finance a new car? Or why the loan repayment period is legally capped? That is consumer credit regulation in action. This is a highly targeted tool that influences the financing terms for durable consumer goods, like cars and electronics. By tweaking down payment rules and maximum repayment periods, the central bank can literally cool down or heat up consumer spending in very specific retail sectors, totally leaving the broader corporate lending landscape alone.
But you know what? Sometimes the absolute most effective tool isn't a strict financial rule at all. It's something called moral suasion. This is basically the use of persuasion, advice, and informal requests to subtly guide commercial bank lending behavior. The central bank holds immense authority. When the governor sends a letter, gives a public speech, or holds a closed-door meeting suggesting banks should lend responsibly or avoid a volatile sector, commercial banks listen. It's basically the master mechanic politely suggesting a change, but it's heavily backed by the implied weight of, potential future regulations if they don't play along.
Finally, Section 4, Balancing the Economic Engine. So, we have our heavy-duty dials and we have our precision lasers. Let's bring it all together to see how these tools actually work in harmony. By constantly monitoring the economic engine, the central bank impartially balances both sets of tools. Over on the left, you've got the massive volume controls, the repo rate, OMOs, and reserve ratios managing the total flow of money to ensure stable growth. And on the right, you have the precise directional controls, like margins, consumer regulations, and moral suasion, channeling that credit away from dangerous speculation and toward genuinely productive sectors. It is exactly this balanced combination that ensures healthy economic expansion without runaway inflation. I really hope this masterclass explainer changes how you watch the financial news from now on. Because knowing this toolkit, the next time you see reports of rising inflation, or maybe a specific housing or stock market sector getting a little too hot, ask yourself, how might the central bank adjust these volume dials and precision lasers? Now that you actually know what's in the drawer, which lever do you think the master mechanic is going to pull next? Thanks so much for joining me today.